is about to bring you into a good land. Make sure you don't forget God, your God.
Welcome back to Teaching Through the Bible as we continue into the last of the commands. So we had the preamble, the historical prologue. We have those in some earlier videos, and then we've been going through the 10 words, what's often called the 10 Commandments. I'll link the video below where I talk about why we're calling it the 10 words instead of the 10 Commandments. And this last one, this one on chapter 5, verse 21 in Deuteronomy, we're about to read. But first, this is about coveting. I have a question. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I don't know if this will be the same in different denominations that you may be from, but I know the one that I'm in, I will hear pastors say when they would like someone to pray for them, a lot of times you hear this phrase that I covet your prayers. That's the way of saying for a lot of people, like, can you pray for me? So what do you think about that phrase? The phrase, I covet your prayers. What do you think about, is this a good or not a good idea? Especially after we talk about this command, this word, by the end of the video, what do you think about the appropriateness of that? Is that fine or not? Love to hear your thoughts below. But let's go ahead and look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 21. And you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his male servant, or his female servant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So here, as you read through that, is there anything that you noticed that was different from the previous words that we talked about? I'll read through it one more time. Think about what might be substantially different here from what we've seen before. From, for example, you shall not murder, or you shall not steal, or something like that. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his male servant or his female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Well, one very key difference here is coveting is internal. Coveting is, you could say, it's desiring to have what someone else has. You want to have that instead of them. So in this case, it's all an internal thing going on in your heart. You don't see that externally. When you see it externally, it's in the form of stealing, or in the form of murder, or in the form of something else, some kind of action that you might put in another one of these categories. Those are the outworkings of coveting. But coveting itself is not an external. You can't look at someone and just be like, I see them coveting right there, right? Not the same way that you can when someone goes and steals something, you can say, oh, look, I saw that person take that thing and not pay for it. They stole it. So all the other commands that we've seen have an external aspect of them. Now, as we've already talked about in previous videos, they're not exclusively external. There's internal aspects, and that's something that Jesus was getting at later on in the New Testament when he talked about, he said, you all know don't murder, but also if you hate your brother in your heart, same category, right? That kind of a thing. He's not giving them some new addition. He's helping them understand what these commands always meant in the first place. There is an idea out there that actually what he was doing was he was making it internal, whereas in the Old Testament it was only external. But actually, this command right here actually shows that's not quite it, because in Deuteronomy chapter 5, one of the early books of the Bible, actually, this is in Exodus as well, so in the second book of the Bible, you have this command that's a prime example of an internal command. There is an internal aspect to even in the Old Testament. And there's plenty of other examples as well. This is just, I think, one of the best ones that we can see very clearly. God does care about what's inside, even in the Old Testament. Jesus is not adding something new. He's not, now that we're in the new covenant, now we have to look at the internal. That's not what's going on there. He is making sure people kind of tweak their understanding of God's commands to understand that there is and always has been this internal aspect as well. But with this particular command, it's really just internal. And like I said, there will be externals that come out of it, but they will take the forms of violating other commands. Maybe you lie because you wanted to get something, or there's different things that happen that violate these other commands that we've got that come from a covetous heart. And it's not, though, as simple as coveting other people's things, what we would think of as other people's things. We actually will see in Deuteronomy, mostly chapters 25, 26, a number of different categories. We have coveting of various things. Coveting what we'll call your stuff, and then also coveting what could be your stuff, and then coveting others' stuff, and then coveting God's stuff. So those four categories broadly summarize what you see in those couple chapters in Deuteronomy that are giving you, as we've seen in other videos when we've gone through other commands, they're giving you a broader picture. So if you have this big circle, you have one dot on that circle is this prime example, which is not coveting. You have this big circle. Maybe here is don't covet your neighbor's wife. And then now you have this other one about not using scales of different measurements, of different weights. And then that's in the same category, though. And then you have this other one and another one. You have all these different ones that we're seeing in Deuteronomy 25 and 26. And so they broadly break down into those four groups. Your stuff could be your stuff, other stuff, and God's stuff. So you have things that you would consider your stuff. If you have a field, if you have a vineyard, you can go harvest it. God has given this to you to take care of, to steward, to manage. You're managing, but it's his stuff. That's really the mindset we got to have that people have a really hard time with, especially in a very individualistic mindset, like a culture like in America, the United States, where everyone's very much, this is mine, I worked for this, you can't have this. God says to his people, actually, it's mine. It's not yours. I'm letting you use it, and you're taking care of it, and so you get a lot of it. You get to harvest, and you get, you could say almost like first dibs on it compared to everybody else, but you don't get all of it, right? So we'll see later on, tithing, that's part of that, that's got to go to God, but then there's also, you can go through the fields and harvest, but then you don't go back through a second time to make sure you got everything. You leave all that stuff for the poor. We actually see that in Ruth, an example of that happening in the book of Ruth. And so that is showing God is saying, this isn't actually yours that you get to just decide to do with what you want. God's saying, this is mine, and this is how you're going to use it. And so we see that with a number of different things in Deuteronomy. And then we even see there's actually a verse that's quoted in 1 Timothy 5:18 that talks about paying pastors. That's about ox. If your oxen is eating, while it's treading out the grain, is your oxen eating some of that? You can't muzzle up that ox so that it doesn't get any of it. You got to share what you're producing with your working animal. And then Paul ties that in and says, New Testament application, this is not just about an ox. This is actually saying, pay your pastors. So there's these New Testament applications we can take from something that just seems totally foreign to a modern culture. But then we get down to stuff that could be your stuff. And by that, I mean there's these laws that are in effect for if a woman, she's married, but then her husband dies, she doesn't have any kids, to pass down her lineage, to pass down an inheritance. A brother of the man she was married to, he can do something about that. You can look into that in the chapter there. There's something he's supposed to do. If he does nothing instead, well, her inheritance is going to go somewhere. It's going to go to the family. He's going to get some of that. He can just do nothing, and it's going to come to him. If he's coveting that, and he says, I'd rather just not do what I'm supposed to do, and I know I'll get some of that. But instead, he is supposed to do something that isn't necessarily going to be the most beneficial to him personally. It's not going to help him have a greater inheritance for his own descendants, right? But that's why this is part of the coveting thing. And there's actually this really weird thing about a sandal. And so I want to talk about that for just a minute, because that can be something that maybe really throw you off with. So you take the sandal becomes an image, a representation for something when, if that brother of the man that has died, if he's like, I'm not going to be involved, I'm not going to help you out in this, then the woman takes the sandal from him, just takes the sandal off him in front of everyone and spits in his face. And there's something symbolic there. And we get a better picture of what the sandal means when we look in Ruth. Actually, Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. And when you look at chapter 4, verse 1 through 8, then Boaz comes and says, hey, there's this woman Naomi, and she needs someone to redeem her. She, her husband died. She has a daughter-in-law, but her son, who was married to her daughter-in-law, he's dead too. And so there's no one for this inheritance to go to. And so someone can redeem this situation. And by redeem it, what it means is that this guy is going to take Naomi, take Ruth, join with them, and then he's going to fulfill this Deuteronomy command. But he doesn't want to do that. He does not want to be involved in that. And he takes his sandal and he gives it to Boaz. Boaz is the second guy in line to do that. If the first guy wasn't going to do it, it's Boaz's job. So he gives his sandal to Boaz. So he doesn't have this taken off from him, but he literally just gives it. And it's like a representation of inheritance. And you're kind of, in a sense, giving it away. So while you're trying to keep your inheritance, while you're trying to keep things for yourself, you're actually end up giving it away. And this is representing that. And so with that woman taking the sandal away in Deuteronomy, it's showing, hey, may your inheritance that you're holding on so tightly to, may that be taken away from you. Then we have just a couple more categories within this, and that's going to be other stuff. It's the third one there. Other stuff. So that's, you're stealing something from someone, or you're overcharging them, things like that. You're trying to get something from them that you want from them. But then we get, lastly, to the biggest thing is going to be stealing from God. Now, in a sense, everything here is stealing from God because it all belongs to Him. Because remember, we got to have that mindset. That's how we can understand how God is commanding them to not be allowed to even keep all of what is, quote, theirs, right? They're having to, in a sense, redistribute some of that. Not a communistic, everyone splits this up all equally between everyone, but a mindset of taking care of the poor, and this is God's stuff, and God is saying to provide for them in these certain ways. And we see that even through this last category, God's stuff. The tithing. Tithe is 10%. You give the first 10% of what you produced. You give 10% of what you've made, of what you've earned, all that kind of stuff. And some of that, it goes through the priests or through the poor. Different times you're going to give that money, it's going to end up going to them. And that's how you're giving it, as it says, to God. And it's being given to those people representing, especially with the priests, they're God's representatives. And so you're giving that to them. Sometimes they give some to the poor. And so you have the system for God to take care of His people who are doing His work, the sacrifices in the tabernacle and in the temple, and then also providing for the poor in the land. And if you don't give that tithe, well, why is that? There are some people who argue that the tithing is only an Old Testament thing, and that's a different kind of a question. if you understand tithing as something that's throughout the Bible and something that God commands even now, then why would you not tithe to your church? You may say, well, I don't really have that much money. I'm really pretty poor myself. Well, notice, though, that God doesn't really give that kind of an exception there. And if he's going to provide for the poor and you are poor, then, he's looking out for you too. You're part of that group. But that doesn't mean you get to give yourself the tithe money, right? You give that to God, and he knows what your situation is. He can take care of you. And so if you are holding back that 10% and saying, yeah, we should generally be tithing, but in my situation, I can't really afford to do that. That 10%, this is all God's stuff, right? We have this mindset. This is all God's. And he's saying, this is all my stuff, but you get to keep and take care of 90% of it, and you need to give me back the 10%. And so if we don't give him back that 10%, then that's coveting. It's in this category here. It's coveting because we're saying, this thing that belongs to you, God, I want to keep that. I think I need to keep that. But at any rate, you are saying, I'm going to keep this money, or, they may have, these sheep, or maybe this grain, or whatever it may be. I'm keeping this for myself, for whatever the reason may be. However good sounding your reason might be, you're saying, I'm keeping it instead of giving it to God. So these are all our different categories of coveting that we see in Deuteronomy. Again, this is mostly chapters 25 and 26. It's all based in and expanding upon what we see in Deuteronomy 5, verse 21. That is the end of the 10 words. That's the end of God's big 10, you could say, commands. A lot of people would. We don't call them the commands, because really the first one isn't a command. The next 9 are. Again, I have that video link below. But that's the end of that. And next time we will continue on with curses and blessings. And we will see this next section of what is this big covenant that God is making with his people. He's given these commands, these stipulations. Now he's going to give curses and blessings. And we'll talk more about that, what that means, in our next video. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.